Have you ever had someone walk out of your life, only to come back later and say, "Let's just be friends," and you're left wondering, what just happened? Hi, I'm Jim Rohn, and if you've ever been blindsided by someone pulling away just when things started getting real, only to return with a confusing offer of friendship, this video is for you. Because today, we're unpacking a pattern that keeps so many people stuck in emotional limbo. It's the moment when a person who couldn't handle commitment suddenly wants to stay connected, just not in the way you hoped. And let me be clear, it's not just a nice gesture. It's often a deeply ingrained coping strategy rooted in avoidant attachment. These people aren't necessarily trying to hurt you, but when the relationship starts to feel emotionally intense, they back off, not because they don't care, but because they feel emotionally unsafe. Then once they've had space to reset, they come back not for intimacy, but for comfort on their terms. And that's when the confusing offer of friendship appears. So here's the big question. Is this reconnection a second chance? Or just a way to keep you emotionally close while keeping commitment far away? In this video, I'll walk you through why avoidant people offer friendship instead of deeper connection. What's really going on beneath the surface when they pull this move? And most importantly, how to protect your peace and choose clarity over confusion. Stick around to the end, because once you understand this pattern, you'll never fall into the emotional trap again. And if this hits home, subscribe to the channel for weekly insights on attachment healing and emotionally healthy relationships. I'd love to have you here. Now, let's get into it. One of the most confusing and painful experiences in relationships is when someone who pulled away suddenly comes back, not with an apology or renewed commitment, but with an offer to just be friends. At first glance, it might seem kind or even hopeful. You may think they're trying to stay connected in a way that still matters. But when you dig deeper, you realize this pattern is rarely about healthy reconnection. More often, it's a strategy, a psychological move rooted in the mindset of someone with an avoidant attachment style. And if you don't understand that, you might end up getting hurt all over again. Avoidant individuals tend to fear emotional intimacy. That fear doesn't always show up right away. In fact, they might appear open, affectionate, even deeply connected in the early stages of a relationship. But when things become emotionally real, when commitment enters the picture, when you start needing each other in deeper ways, that's when the walls go up. For avoidant people, closeness can feel dangerous. It activates old wounds, often from childhood, where closeness came with conditions, inconsistency, or emotional abandonment. So instead of leaning in, they step back. Sometimes they disappear entirely. Silence, withdrawal, coldness, it's their way of protecting themselves. But here's where it gets tricky. Once that distance has been established, once they've calmed their internal alarms and feel safe again, the loneliness creeps in. They start missing the connection, not the emotional intensity, but the companionship, the familiarity. That's when they reach out. And what they offer isn't reconnection in the form of mutual healing or growth. What they offer is friendship. Why? Because it's safe. Friendship to them is emotionally low risk. It doesn't demand vulnerability. It doesn't ask them to change. It lets them feel connected without feeling exposed. From the outside, it can feel like a second chance. It might seem like progress, like they're trying in their own way to repair what was broken. But in many cases, it's a detour, a stall, a way to hold on to you while avoiding the real emotional work a deeper relationship would require. It's not that they're malicious, it's that they're operating from fear. And if you're not careful, you'll mistake that fear-driven offer for love. You'll start compromising your own needs for clarity, depth, and consistency just to stay close to someone who isn't offering you the same in return. Understanding this pattern is critical. It lets you step back and look at what's really being offered. Are they reaching out to meet you emotionally or to manage their own discomfort? Are they offering friendship because they care about you or because it's the only level of connection they feel in control of? That difference matters, because once you see it clearly, you can stop taking their behavior personally. You can stop waiting, guessing, or hoping. And you can start asking a better question. Does this version of connection actually serve me? If the answer is no, then letting go isn't cruel, it's honest. And it might just be the most self-respecting thing you ever do. To really understand why avoidant people behave the way they do, you have to start by understanding how they see the world and, more importantly, how they experience closeness. Their mindset is not shaped by the present. It's shaped by the past, by early relationships where emotional needs weren't reliably met. When a child grows up learning that expressing emotions leads to rejection, neglect, or emotional chaos, they develop a strategy to survive that environment. And that strategy is distance. Emotional distance becomes their version of safety. So as adults, even when they crave connection, and they do, they often feel deeply threatened by intimacy when it actually arrives. To an avoidant person, vulnerability doesn't mean connection, it means risk. It feels like stepping into a situation where they have no control. That might not make logical sense to someone with a more secure or anxious attachment style, but for them, closeness can trigger a kind of internal alarm system. The closer they get to someone, the more they feel like they might lose themselves, lose their freedom, their identity, their emotional safety. So instead of leaning into the relationship, they lean out. They back away, often in subtle ways at first. Maybe they avoid serious conversations. Maybe they become dismissive or cold. Maybe they suddenly get busy and unavailable. These are all signs that their nervous system is being overwhelmed, not by the other person's behavior, but by the emotional weight of intimacy itself. The trouble is, most of this is happening under the surface. It's not always a conscious decision. Avoidant individuals may not even realize they're pulling away because of fear. They might justify it by saying, "I just need space," or "I'm not ready for a relationship," or "things were moving too fast." And in a way, all of those statements are true, but they're incomplete. What's really happening is their internal blueprint is telling them closeness is unsafe. Stay in control. Stay distant. So even when they care about someone, that care is filtered through a lens of self-protection. And here's where it gets really complicated for the other person in the relationship. Because you might be doing everything right, you're showing up, you're being honest, loving, patient. And yet instead of drawing your avoidant partner closer, it pushes them further away. That's not because you're doing anything wrong, it's because the more emotionally present you are, the more emotionally visible they feel. And for someone with an avoidant mindset, being seen on that level can feel suffocating. So they build walls, they maintain control by keeping people at arm's length, and often they aren't trying to hurt anyone. They just don't have the emotional tools to be close in a way that feels safe to them. That's why understanding the avoidant mindset is so important, not so you can excuse their behavior, but so you can stop taking it personally. Once you see that their withdrawal is about their fear, not your worth, you can stop blaming yourself. And more importantly, you can begin deciding whether their coping style matches the kind of relationship you truly want. Friendship for avoidant individuals often serves as a kind of emotional safe zone. It's the place where they can still feel connected to someone, but without the intensity, vulnerability, or expectations that come with romantic commitment. Now that might sound odd if you're someone who views friendship as a deeply intimate bond in its own right. But for the avoidant person, it's different. In their emotional framework, friendship is manageable. It's connection on their terms. It doesn't require them to open up in uncomfortable ways. It doesn't threaten their sense of independence or personal space. And most importantly, it doesn't carry the weight of needing to show up consistently with emotional depth. When someone avoidant ends a romantic relationship or distances themselves emotionally, they may reappear later with a request to stay friends. On the surface, it looks like they're offering peace or even a second chance. But underneath, it's often a way of restoring a sense of control. In friendship, they're no longer on the hook for the emotional responsibilities that a romantic relationship demands. They don't have to navigate the messiness of intimacy. They don't have to confront their own fear of being seen. Instead, they get to be near someone they care about, but without risking the vulnerability that real closeness would require. And from their perspective, this can feel genuine. They might really believe they're offering something meaningful. They may feel sincere in wanting to keep you in their life. But what they're offering isn't necessarily what you need. It's what they can handle. It's what feels emotionally safe for them. That's the key distinction. It's not about what's fair or balanced. It's about what helps them avoid discomfort. And if you're not paying attention, you might accept that offer out of hope, believing it's a step forward when in reality, it's a way of keeping things exactly where they've always been emotionally distant. This is why the "let's be friends" message from an avoidant ex can feel so confusing. Because you're thinking about emotional connection, you're hoping for healing or reconnection, but they're thinking about comfort. They're trying to create an emotional arrangement where they don't have to deal with the pressure of your needs or their own feelings. It's not about intimacy, it's about safety. And for them, friendship offers just enough emotional closeness to feel familiar without the risk of having to grow. It's important to recognize that while friendship can be a beautiful, meaningful connection between two people, it can also be misused when it becomes a way to avoid deeper emotional work. For the person on the receiving end, it can feel like being held in place close enough to care, but never close enough to connect. You might find yourself stuck in a loop, hoping things will change, while the other person quietly reinforces the very walls that drove you apart in the first place. So the question becomes, does this version of friendship serve both of you equally? Or is it just a safe zone for one person and an emotional compromise for the other? Being honest about that answer can save you from a lot of unnecessary pain. When someone who has emotionally withdrawn from you comes back and says, "Let's just be friends," it's hard not to feel a flicker of hope, especially if part of you is still emotionally attached. You may start wondering if this is the beginning of something new, a chance to rebuild what was lost. But here's where the emotional confusion starts. Their words sound like connection. Their presence feels familiar. But their actions often say something very different. You're left in this grey area where nothing is clear. They don't want closeness, but they don't want distance either. And that space in between is where confusion and frankly emotional pain takes hold. Avoidant individuals often don't mean to cause this confusion. Most of the time they're not being manipulative on purpose. But they are trying to manage their own internal discomfort. When they offer friendship after withdrawing, it's usually not because they've had some emotional epiphany. It's because they're uncomfortable with the silence. They may feel guilty for leaving. They may feel lonely. Or they might want to know that the connection is still there just in case they need it. But instead of dealing with those feelings directly, they offer a version of connection they think they can handle: low commitment, low expectation friendship. The problem is that this friendly behavior sends mixed signals. One moment they're distant, the next they're liking your posts, texting you casually, or checking in to see how you're doing. but when you try to move the conversation deeper, they back away again. It's push and pull, advance and retreat. And if you're not aware of what's happening, you might misinterpret it. You might think they're trying to come back. You might think they've changed. But the truth is, in most cases, they're not reconnecting, they're regulating. They're trying to reduce their discomfort without actually changing the emotional structure that caused the disconnection in the first place. And this kind of dynamic is incredibly destabilizing for the person on the receiving end. You start questioning your instincts. You feel hopeful one minute and abandoned the next. You might start blaming yourself again, wondering if you're asking too much, moving too fast, or misreading the situation. And the more you try to make sense of their behavior, the more entangled you become in it. Because it's not meant to make sense, it's meant to serve them. It's a way of maintaining control over their emotional environment without taking on the vulnerability that deeper connection would require. What's important to realize is that these mixed signals aren't a sign of emotional readiness. They're a symptom of avoidance. And unless that person is actively working on their emotional patterns through therapy, reflection, or real self-awareness, the pattern won't change. You'll keep getting breadcrumbs and calling it a meal. You'll keep hoping for more while settling for less. And that is the trap. So the clarity you need won't come from them. It has to come from you. You have to decide whether the version of friendship they're offering is actually enough for your heart, or if it's just a confusing placeholder keeping you from the connection you truly deserve. One of the most damaging effects of these avoidant-driven dynamics is the subtle but very real power imbalance they create. On the surface, it may look like two people mutually agreeing to just be friends or to take things slow, but underneath that surface, there's often a very different story playing out. The person who is emotionally invested, the one who still hopes for connection, tends to be the one doing all the emotional work. They're constantly adjusting, compromising, and second-guessing their needs. Meanwhile, the avoidant individual sets the emotional tone of the relationship by deciding when to engage, when to pull back, and how close is too close. That's not a balanced relationship. That's emotional control. What's tricky is that this control isn't always obvious. The avoidant person may seem calm, rational, even kind. They might say things like, "Let's just take it one day at a time," or "I care about you, but I'm not ready." These statements sound reasonable. They give the illusion of openness. But what they're really doing is shifting all the responsibility for emotional regulation onto the other person. You end up walking on eggshells trying not to scare them away. You begin to downplay your needs, hoping that if you're just patient enough or understanding enough, they'll eventually come around. But they don't. Not because they don't care, but because they're comfortable. In this setup, they hold all the emotional power. They get to feel connected without being vulnerable. They get the benefits of your attention, your loyalty, your emotional support, without offering the same in return. And over time, this dynamic chips away at your self-esteem. You begin to feel like you're asking for too much, even when all you really want is clarity and consistency. This is what Megan Wex means when she talks about breadcrumbs. In these types of relationships, the avoidant person offers just enough connection to keep you engaged. A warm text, a thoughtful comment, maybe a casual hangout. And in your heart, you translate these small gestures as signs of hope. You tell yourself, they're trying or they just need more time. But if you step back and look at the bigger picture, not much is changing. You're still the one reaching out, you're still the one waiting, and they're still the one deciding the terms of the relationship. And the emotional cost of this imbalance is high. You feel drained, anxious, unsure of where you stand. You lose touch with your own boundaries because you've spent so much time adapting to someone else's comfort zone. And the longer it goes on, the harder it becomes to break free. You're not just attached to them, you're attached to the possibility of them. To the idea that this might turn into something more, if you just hold on a little longer. But here's the truth. Love shouldn't feel like a power struggle. You shouldn't have to earn someone's consistency or beg for their emotional presence. A healthy connection is mutual. It involves two people showing up, not one person compromising while the other avoids. And if that balance isn't there, it's not your job to force it. It's your job to see it and decide what you're willing to accept. One of the most frustrating and emotionally exhausting patterns you'll ever experience in a relationship is what's often called the approach-avoid cycle. And avoidant individuals are masters at it, usually without even knowing they're doing it. Here's how it works. They pull away when the relationship becomes too emotionally intense. Maybe things are getting serious, or you're expressing your deeper needs, or they're starting to feel too emotionally exposed. That triggers their fear, and their instinct is to retreat. They might ghost you, shut down emotionally, or end the relationship entirely. You're left reeling, confused and hurt. Then after some time and space, days, weeks or even months, they start to feel better. The emotional pressure is gone. They've had time to reset, and now they feel safe again. That's when they come back. Maybe they reach out with a casual message, or they act like nothing ever happened. And here's where it gets tricky, because they're not returning with a changed mindset or new level of emotional awareness. They're not coming back to do the work to grow or to deepen the relationship. They're simply trying to restore the connection on their terms that feel emotionally manageable for them. This pattern creates what I call an emotional loop. You get close, they pull away. They return, you reconnect. Then you get close again, and they pull away again. And on it goes. Each cycle reinforces the emotional confusion you feel. Every time they come back, you want to believe it's different this time. You want to believe that space has changed something. But unless they've faced their fear of intimacy and made the choice to confront those deeper emotional patterns, nothing has actually changed. They've just reset. And for you, the one on the receiving end, it feels like emotional whiplash. You start to doubt your perception. You wonder if you're asking for too much. You begin to question your instincts. Because every time they return, they give you just enough attention to stir hope. But that hope is rarely followed by lasting change. The relationship never really moves forward. It just circles back to the version they feel comfortable with, one where they don't have to be vulnerable, one where you're the emotional anchor, and they're the one drifting in and out. This loop is especially harmful because it reinforces a kind of emotional dependency. You become addicted to the highs and lows, the relief when they return, the pain when they disappear. It creates a trauma bond where unpredictability becomes mistaken for passion or depth. But what it really is instability. And emotional instability over time wears down your confidence, your clarity, and your sense of what love should actually feel like. Breaking out of this cycle starts with naming it. You have to see the pattern for what it is. Not a story of almost love or missed timing, but a loop that keeps you stuck. And once you recognize that, you can start to ask the deeper question, do I want a relationship that resets or one that evolves? Because you deserve growth. You deserve consistency. And if the other person can't offer that, it's not your job to wait. It's your job to move forward. When you've been caught in the emotional storm of an avoidant relationship, whether romantic or platonic, it becomes absolutely essential to step back and get clear about boundaries, self-respect, and what you're actually willing to tolerate. Because the longer you stay in the loop of chasing, waiting, and adjusting to someone else's emotional limits, the more likely you are to lose sight of your own needs. And make no mistake, the cost of that is high. It's your peace, your self-esteem, and often your ability to trust your own judgment. That's why setting boundaries isn't just about pushing someone away. It's about drawing a line that protects what matters you. Setting boundaries starts with getting honest. Ask yourself, am I constantly compromising my emotional needs just to stay connected? Am I afraid to speak up because I don't want to scare them off? If the answer is yes, you're already giving up parts of yourself to preserve a relationship that may not be giving you the same in return. And that's a warning sign. Relationships, healthy ones, require mutual availability. That means both people show up, both people take emotional responsibility, and both people are willing to grow. If you're doing all the work and they're doing all the retreating, that's not partnership. That's emotional imbalance. And it's very easy to take avoidant behavior personally, especially when it feels like you did everything right. But here's something that's critical to understand: their fear of closeness isn't caused by you. You might have triggered it by showing up with love, with honesty, or with emotional depth, but that trigger didn't come from you. It came from their past. From unhealed wounds, usually from childhood where closeness was unsafe or unpredictable. That means their withdrawal is not a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of their fear. That's why clarity is so important. You can't change someone's attachment style, but you can choose not to take responsibility for it. You can decide with kindness and strength that you're not going to shrink yourself to keep someone comfortable. You're not going to accept crumbs when what you need is consistency. And you're not going to confuse potential for commitment. A lot of avoidant people have potential. They're often intelligent, thoughtful, even loving in small moments. But if they're not emotionally available, if they can't sit with discomfort, communicate openly, or grow alongside you, then potential isn't enough. You need action. You need presence. So what does self-respect look like in this context? It looks like knowing your value and standing by it. It means saying no to dynamics that drain you. It means being willing to walk away, not out of anger, but out of clarity. Because the relationship you want, the one you deserve, starts with you. It starts with your ability to recognize what's healthy, to honor your emotional truth, and to say, I'm no longer available for relationships that ask me to abandon myself. And that right there is the beginning of emotional freedom. It's important to understand that avoidant people are not villains. They're not cold-hearted manipulators, and they're not trying to hurt you on purpose. In fact, many of them are dealing with pain they haven't even begun to understand themselves. Their behaviors, pulling away, shutting down, avoiding intimacy, are often rooted in early experiences of emotional neglect, inconsistency, or overwhelm. Somewhere along the way, they learned that closeness is dangerous and that vulnerability leads to loss or rejection. So they developed strategies to survive distance, independence, control. These strategies helped them cope back then, but now they stand in the way of deep connection. And for many avoidants, that fear still lives quietly under the surface, driving how they relate without their full awareness. That's why compassion matters. You can look at them and see the human behind the behavior. You can recognize their struggle and even empathize with it. You can care about their pain and wish for their healing. And this is where the real strength comes in. You can do all of that without betraying yourself. Because compassion without boundaries becomes self-abandonment. And when you keep sacrificing your emotional well-being just to stay close to someone who can't meet you emotionally, you're not helping them heal. You're simply reinforcing a dynamic that leaves you depleted and them unchallenged. Real compassion includes truth. And the truth is that relationships require two people willing to be present, open and vulnerable. Not perfectly, but genuinely. If you're the only one doing the emotional heavy lifting, if you're constantly regulating the space between you so they don't get overwhelmed, then you're carrying a relationship that's not reciprocal. And that's not sustainable. You can love someone and still walk away. You can understand their pain and still say, I can't keep doing this. That's not cruel. That's honest. That's healthy. Think of it this way. If someone were drowning and you jumped in without a life vest, you'd drown too. Helping doesn't mean sinking with them. It means recognizing your limits, anchoring yourself, and offering support from solid ground. That's what boundaries do. They protect your ability to care without losing yourself in someone else's emotional chaos. They give you the space to see clearly what's yours, what's theirs, and what's no longer working. So don't let empathy become an excuse to stay stuck. You can feel deeply, you can care, you can wish them well, and still decide that the healthiest thing you can do is let go. You're not abandoning them. You're choosing yourself. You're saying, I see your pain, but I can't carry it for you. And in that moment, you're not closing your heart. You're honoring it. You're refusing to participate in patterns that keep both of you from growing. That's what compassion with boundaries looks like. And that's what emotional maturity demands, not just for them, but for you. Because healing isn't just about understanding others. It's about protecting the part of yourself that finally knows what it's worth. If you've made it to the end of this video, I want to thank you not just for watching, but for having the courage to confront something that most people try to avoid. Relationships with avoidant individuals can be deeply confusing and emotionally painful, not because you're broken or asking too much, but because the dynamic itself often lacks what you truly need: clarity, consistency, and emotional presence. Throughout this conversation, we explored why avoidant people often reappear in your life with an offer of friendship instead of true emotional commitment. We looked at how their fear of intimacy, rooted in past experiences, leads them to seek safety over connection. We talked about how friendship becomes their emotional safe zone, how mixed signals keep you stuck in hope, and how that dynamic slowly creates a power imbalance where you compromise your own needs to maintain the illusion of closeness. We also looked at the emotional loop and reset cycle where they leave, return, and reset things without ever really changing. And perhaps most importantly, we talked about what it means to set boundaries, honor your own self-worth, and have compassion without self-betrayal. Now here's the final message I want to leave you with. You deserve more than emotional crumbs. You deserve mutual effort. You deserve to feel seen, heard, and chosen, not kept on hold as someone else works through their fear of closeness. Friendship should never be a fallback for someone who can't offer you real intimacy. It should be built on trust, openness, and shared values. Anything less is emotional limbo, and you weren't made to live in confusion. If this message resonated with you, if something clicked, or you saw your own experience reflected in this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. I share weekly insights to help you navigate love loss, healing, and emotional growth with honesty and clarity. Your journey matters, and I'm here to support it. And I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below and share your story, your questions, or just let me know what part of this video stood out the most. Your words could help someone else who's struggling with the same confusion you've faced. Again, thank you for being here. I'm Jim Rohn, and until next time, stay honest with yourself, protect your peace, and never settle for less than what your heart truly deserves.